the Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. Well, times are getting interesting, that's for sure. Are these the interesting times that the Chinese warned us of? Well, I don't know about you, but our good friend Darryl Schoon is here. And Darryl, it's getting more interesting by the day, isn't it?
It is, Kerry. And for some context, since this is the beginning of January, this is January 2022, I wanted to frame what we're going to discuss today with a series of things that I wrote 15 years ago. All right.
Sure.
And 15 years ago in 2007, I presented a paper. This is it. I put it in book form later. But in March 2007, I presented a paper called How to Survive the Crisis and Prosper in the Process. All right. And an analysis of the economic crises facing the U.S. and the world. This was 16 months before the bottom was going to fall out in Wall Street in September 2008. This is March 2007 that I presented this paper. All right. And what I want to say is how I came to write this thing. It's 148 pages, really in depth, you know, and I had never taken an econ course in my life. I majored in political science. I dropped out, you know, I went to law school for a year, became a hippie, dropped out, had this life that rare, you know, I'm luckily to have survived. And in 2007, I make this prediction that we're headed for the toilet economically. All right. That turned out to be true. Well, what happened is, and how I came to write this is I attribute to something that happened to me in 2007 in January. I mean, in June, in 1990, no, not 2000, 1992, 92, 91. These words came to me, Kerry, from out of the blue, and I want to read them here. Just came from wherever those words come from. And it said this: in times of expansion, it is to the hare the prizes go. Quick, risk-taking, and bold, his qualities are exactly suited to the times. In periods of contraction, the tortoise is favored. Slow and conservative, quick only to retract his vulnerable head and neck, his is the wisest bet when the slow and sure is preferable to the quick and easy. Every so often, however, there comes a time when neither the hare nor the tortoise is the victor. This is when both the bear and the bull have been vanquished, when the pastures upon which the bull once grazed are long gone, and the bear's lair itself lies buried deep beneath the rubble of economic collapse. This is the time of the vulture, for the vulture feeds neither upon the pastures of the bull, nor the stored up wealth of the bear. The vulture feeds instead upon the blind ignorance and denial of the ostrich. The time of the vulture is at hand.
Mm-hmm.
Kerry, those words just came in my head, all right?
Hey, you're describing a Wall Street hedge fund there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's coming. And this was 1991. They just came to me. What happened, Kerry, was I began studying economics. I began reading about that's how I found out about the Fed, gold, everything, credit, banks, everything. I started on this mission. And along the way, I met Antal Fekete, that incredible professor of Austrian economics in the late 1990s. And then by 2007, when my friend Marshall from law school put together a group called the Positive Demon Network, I presented a 148-page paper called How to Survive the Crisis and Prosper in the Process, and predicted that we were in for an economic shitstorm. On the second page, on the page after I just read you, I have these words: understanding today's financial markets. Quote, if you can understand your local real estate market, you can understand what is happening to global financial markets. Although mortgages and multiple listings have little in common with derivative swaps and tranches, what collapsed U.S. real estate markets also collapsed global financial markets. Prices of both real estate in your local market and global financial markets are going to collapse because of rising interest rates. Okay, that's March 2007. Now, what happened is that here we are in 2022, and in December, the Fed is getting serious about rising interest rates. All right.
Say
And
they
we've all heard. Yeah,
They say they are.
yes, they are. But there's a difference here. The difference is they know they've had to. It's sort of like somebody saying, I should not drink as much. All right. I mean, people are looking at you funny, and you're not steady, but you've got problems. All right. And every time you decide not to take a drink, you push a couple of steps and you take a drink. What happened in the last quarter of 2021 is the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. All right. Now the Fed is like, what was it? There's an old saying by Sun Tzu on the art of war. And I didn't read the book, but I love the quote. And the quote is, if you understand your enemies well enough, you could sit by a river and eventually their bodies will float by. All right. Now, you know what they're going to do. And what I believe is this: they are going to be forced to raise interest rates because they've seen their paper empire blow up because of inflation before. Now, the reason why it hasn't for 40 years, even though they pumped more money into it than it's ever can contain, is because there's an offsetting deflationary collapse in demand where debts are crapping out, where money is disappearing. It's like Japan. Ever since 1990 and the Nikkei collapsed, stocks lost 80%. Japan is a dead man walking. They bought more money. The government has put more money in the markets, and all they're doing is staying even. Well, that's the same thing here. We're in the same boat. The boat is sinking. Why it's going to go down and not just flow is because now they're being forced to raise interest rates, and what's going to happen in the near future is what I predicted in 2007. Now, what happened is, Kerry, after I wrote the book and put it out there on the internet, it got ordered in over 25 countries. All right, my website, Survive the Crisis, what was it? I threw it up there, and I got 10,000 hits in 2 months. All right, and I started writing articles on this. Most of my articles didn't get picked up until a year later, but I want to read now for the listeners here, viewers, 2 articles that I wrote before the economic collapse, before it collapsed. All right. The first one I wrote because it collapsed in September 2008. The first one I wrote was in December, that I want to quote from, is December 2007. All right. 10 months before the Wall Street collapse. It's called The Winter of Our Discontent. And I quoted Dylan. It's the last day's last hour of the last happy year. All right. This is 10 months before what we call the Great Financial Crisis. And this is what I said. As we collectively move towards the economic disaster awaiting us, the investment community is hoping the world's central banks will be able to save them from the crises set in motion by this summer's credit collapse. If the truth be known, and someday it will be, central banks are at the very center of today's problems. Indeed, they caused them. Today's disintegration of capital markets based on debt-based paper began in 1913 with the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The reason why I alluded to that summer's credit collapse is that I was acutely aware of them. Why? Because in August in 2007, Martha and I were with 25 other people at a monastery in Hungary, where I had been invited by Professor Antal Fekete to give a talk at his gold standard university. Now, there was no Wi-Fi in this monastery. The rent was cheap. That's why he rented it for his gold standard thing. And we were there, and Kerry, in the middle of August, every one of us was gathered in this room where they had the wired computers, focused on watching what was happening to the credit markets. In August, that's the first time it snapped. And the central banks had to come in and pour money into it. So we were acutely aware of it because we're in this small group of people, and we'd come from basically all over the world to talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. So that's how I was aware of that summer's contraction. Then I read on, debt-based paper money has led nations and the world down a very dangerous path, facilitating expansion by encumbering future revenues with compounding debt, inevitably indebts individuals, businesses, and governments beyond their ability to repay. In the beginning, production expands, needs are met, and everyone goes home happy. In the end, everybody's house gets repossessed. This is when the amount of debt has grown so large, governments, businesses, and consumers collapse under its collective weight. As autumn approaches, this summer's credit crisis continues to spread throughout the global grid created by today's financial wizards. Wizards so adept, they do not understand what they have set in motion. That this summer's credit crisis surprised them the most is the most disturbing news of all. The financial wizards of Wall Street and the city are hoping this summer's credit crisis is a bad cold at worst, that perhaps a slight fever in time will heal the illness and they can return once again to the task of carving out billion-dollar bonuses from capitalism's rotting carcass. Capitalism, quote, any economic system based on central bank issuance of debt-based paper money. But the wizards of Wall Street and the city will be wrong this fall. This summer's credit contraction looks increasingly less like a cold and more like a cancer, which has metastasized and made its way into the lymph nodes of our global economy. We wait as the inevitable end of a debt-based paper money system approaches. But have faith, for after the fall, a resurrection will occur, albeit at the end of a long and very hard winter. Now, that was December 2007, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The next year, it happened in September, all right? That's when AIG and Wall Street banks, and they went under, Bear Stearns. And I wrote this: the killers are with the patient. There is nothing more dangerous than when those responsible for a nation's trouble are believed to be its savior. The Wall Street Journal had one fact correct regarding Wall Street's accelerating collapse, when on September 20th, they wrote, when government officials surveyed the failing American financial system this week, they didn't see only a collapsed bank or the surrender of a giant insurance firm. They saw the circulatory system of the US economy, credit markets starting to fail, unquote. The Wall Street Journal was correct in that the circulatory system of the US economy was failing. Because the Wall Street Journal is a house organ of Wall Street investment banks and their co-conspirators in government, the Wall Street Journal blamed deteriorating credit markets, not those responsible, to wit, Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, and their cohorts at the Federal Reserve banks. Alan Greenspan's bastard son. Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan's surrogate successor at the Federal Reserve, is using Greenspan's discredited playbook to hopefully resuscitate America's economy. But pouring more credit in America's stalled economy will not restart the US economy any more than pouring gasoline into a flooded engine will restart an engine. Excessive credit caused the problems, and more credit will only exacerbate it. The US Central Bank, however, is now back to a corner from which there is no exit. I wrote those words in September 2008. This is January 2022. I also noted when I reread that article that I also noted, which I had forgotten, that it's that month, Kerry, Bernanke had written a check to the US banks on Wall Street. He bought $700 billion worth of subprime US mortgages off the books of the banks. Dodgy debt, off the books. Just took out the banks, their problem loans. US taxpayers under the Fed owned them. I mean, who knows owned the Fed, all right? They bought them on the books because they can cook anything up, and turn paper into another form of paper. And that happened in September. So, and 3 months later, that didn't work. So they started QE. So this is 15 years later, Kerry. And, I went back and looked at all my articles. I basically stopped writing articles in around 2012. Why? I was saying the same thing. I think you can see, Kerry, that from the 2 articles I wrote here, I said it all in the first year. All right. And pointing out the obvious, I've got better things to do. All right. Because the choir that has heard the song already believes, and those who don't won't hear it. So, I don't like preaching I don't like preaching. All right. When nobody's listening. So I basically stopped writing articles. But here we are in 2022, and they're starting to raise interest rates again. And what I predicted, or what was predicted, because I didn't predict about the time of the vulture, those words that came to me about a complete economic collapse, I believe is what we're going to see in the next couple of years. Kerry, you and I have been talking about this for years now.
Yeah.
And the problem with predicting once you see a probable certainty, is you see it everywhere. So every time you cough, you think it's COVID. All right. But if you don't believe in COVID, you cough, fuck, it's the flu. Oh, it's allergies. But every time you cough, when you know something like this is the foot, you think it could be it. So that's what we've done. That's been our mistake, because we've seen the certainty of the collapse, that the machinations of the Fed the last 15 years, I've written, oh, we're there. Well, we're not there. But when I found out with a total certainty, and I knew that they said they're going to raise rates before, because they're trying to get the markets to back off. They're trying to get the boys betting on tomorrow to back off and not push the market into a bigger bubble. But they're caught between a rock and a hard place. And this is the thing of Sun Tzu, when you know your enemy. Well, in a way, the Fed is our enemy, but we're all in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Fed raises interest rates too far, we're all going to go down. Antal Fekete, the professor, said once, and I remember when he said it, Kerry, it was 2006. We were in Dallas, and he was giving a talk in Dallas. And he turned to me and he said, Darryl, the day gold goes through the roof is going to be the saddest day in history. Now, he wasn't speaking as an investor. Antal was not a speculator. Antal had a professor's salary, all right? And he identified with just the people who knew far less than he did. People just trying to make a living and get along on the savings that they had. That's why he was so pissed at Barrick when he found out Barrick was forward selling gold at a lower price. And I reread one of Antal's earliest pieces that are not, I knew Antal as well as anybody did, all right? And he said in one of his pieces, I was stunned, because I've come to this conclusion, and I don't believe Antal was right about everything. In fact, I remember I let him off the airport in Los Angeles when Marshall had flown him over to give a talk here. And I said, hey, Antal, I don't agree with you on everything, but I'm not the one to quibble with you. Antal was brilliant, and he loved a good fight, and he would drive you into the ground if he could, And I certainly didn't have his intellectual firepower, but I didn't agree with him. I had my own points of view, but he thought about this stuff, and he saw things that other people didn't see. He was so pissed at Barrick because he had put his life savings basically into Barrick, because Barrick was the world's largest gold mining company. Yeah. He thought that was a great place to have it. And when he saw Peter Monk, a fellow Hungarian, forward selling gold at a lower price than the spot price of gold, he fucking went nuts and accused them of all sorts of shit. What he said, Kerry, was this. Other than, and he just said it as pure speculation, if this is not a massive program to launder gold, there's no other reason for forward selling production out of a mine in a rising market. And what happened is, it sort of came to pass that Barrick Gold was laundering all that gold that was stolen out of China by the Japanese. And the U.S. got it, the CIA got it, and used Barrick. I mean, George Bush, head of the CIA, was on Barrick's board of directors. They used Barrick. The rot gut goes, the story goes that the U.S. used Barrick to clean up the gold, all the gold that they took, from the Japanese in the Philippines. So Antal saw that, and Antal knew that. But what it is this, it doesn't matter what you and I say on this program, except in some way to those listening. We're either going to be there at the end, we're either going to make it, we're either not, we either have gold, or we don't. But what I just wanted to say for the record today, before we went into this, Kerry, was I said this stuff 15 years ago. I saw it 20 years ago when when I first started my conversation with Antal, and the joke that we made, the Chinese joke, curse that may you be born in interesting times. These are interesting times. And it's getting worse.
Most interesting ever.
The most interesting ever. But Kerry, I want to say something, and it runs against the grain of everybody's instincts. I am more positive about the future than I've ever been. Not the immediate future, but the future. And in that way, I'm like those fools that we consider fools, the Jehovah Witnesses that are praying for the, or all the Mormons that all got their dried goods stashed in the ground because the crap is going to happen. It's just going to hit the fan, and then the world's going to end. From a metaphysical point of view, I believe that, in fact, they have their finger on it. Not that I believe their version. Not that I believe, what is it, South Park? I loved one of South Park's greatest jokes. They said, "Yeah, you know who's in heaven? The Mormons." I mean, I don't remember a lot of quotes from South Park. That's one of them. All right?
The one I remember, and it's gone.
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
And it's gone. So saying soon, and it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we can relate to. But my belief is this, because before I got into money, and I really got into money, I mean, I can explain it, better than I ever thought I was going to, and I had no understanding of it, Kerry. I remember in the 1990s when I started thinking about this crap, the question came on my mind: what happened to all the money in the 1930s? That was a fundamental question. Where did it go? And what I found out, Kerry, was that money was not what I thought it was. I thought money was like a form of savings of gold, and if it went, somebody else had it. What I realized after I started investigating what I was investigating was, after the Federal Reserve got a hold of money, money was no longer was merely a credit and debt instrument. It was floating. And when credit disappeared, when debt was foreclosed on, and credit disappeared and dried up, money disappeared too, because all money had become was a floating coupon of credit and debt in circulation. So when credit collapsed in the 1930s, money disappeared. So what has happened, Kerry, is that I now understand this. I understand something that was opaque as it is, because I know most everybody's, excluding the people who are listening to this, your viewership, their view of money was much like mine was the year before I started thinking about this stuff. Like, God, I hope I have more tomorrow than I have today. Well, I mean, a friend of mine, he died with hundreds of millions of dollars. All right. And he made all his money in real estate, and he had no idea about that. He didn't matter to him. And what I'm saying is this: it matters. Not that it's going to change things, but it matters because it'll explain why things are the way they are. But as much as I understand why things are the way they are, Kerry, I believe before this started that we were going to have a massive thing was going to happen to this earth. All right. And Bucky Fuller said it. He said this in 1981, Kerry. He said, mankind is entering a period of an unprecedented crisis. Unprecedented. All right. And he said, you are going to see the collapse of economic, political, and religious institutions. I mean, we've had these same religious institutions, last 2,000 years, maybe 2,500, and our political institutions and the economic institutions are a lot, they're not as old, but he said they're all going to go. They're going to be swept away. And he said, this is another thing. He said, the bankruptcy of the United States is a good thing because it's going to trigger the bankruptcy of the rest of the world. All it is a leading indicator of change. And he says, once you sweep away the separate sovereignties on this planet, then humankind will be able to live for its highest and best and not be in the grasp of those who control the governments and the resources around the world. That's what he said. He's going to take this to clean the decks. He said, we already have the technology for a better life for everybody. But those who are in control of this world are keeping that away from us because to them, scarcity is merely a function of unrealized profit.
Yeah. That's
what it is. And that's the basis of it. So what Bucky said, the shitstorm that you're going to see, it's coming, it's baked in the cake, and it's going to be better. So, I mean, that's what I said at the last part of my book. that we're on the edge of good change. Now, I'm not more, I do not want to see the day that gold goes to the roof. And if I'm going to, because I know what Antal said, it's going to day that everything goes down. Everything that you see as familiar is going to get wiped out because everybody has their assets in the game. You know, you can't, there's no game other than this game. Yeah. They've taken over the whole planet. Everybody's on credit debt. I mean, the goddamn communist countries have central banks now issuing out credit like it's going out of style. I mean, if China's central bank did not pump out all that money in 2009, we would have hit the shitter.
Yeah.
But they printed themselves and raised everybody up because we had this new source of demand. Well, that's gone. So we've tapped out the reservoir. And now they're going to raise interest rates again because they have to. Not because they want to, but because they have to. And so the whole thing, Kerry, is this. I mean, what the hell? I'm 76. All right. Who knows how much I've got left on that wick? You know, I mean, maybe it's going to be extinguished tonight and I won't have to live through what's going on. But maybe I won't. And so I'm in this with everybody else. I have my point of view. I'm not saying I'm right, but I've certainly talked myself into this. I bought my point of view. And that's what I want to say is that the context that we're seeing this here, Kerry, is bigger than us, whether we know it or not. It's bigger than us. And we're a part of it. And we have no choice anyway. We're like the stuff on the float of we're like the stuff on the top, on the little specks of water on the top of the tsunami as it's cresting. You know, I mean, you can't get off that wave. No, we're here.
No way. Well,
no way.
In this case, I always say, Darryl, when you're dealing with the Federal Reserve, the government, I always say that the cure is the disease.
You're absolutely right. And that's what Bucky said. He said, don't see this. He said, this is the destruction of our present economy, the destruction of our present institution is going to be what humanity needs to free itself of basically what we've created throughout history. And Bucky always pointed out that it's always been the stronger over the weaker. He pointed out, he said, you know, the capitalist system, the 1% is at the top. He said, USSR, the 1% is at the top. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, you can change the institutions, but the same dynamic is underneath it. One of my sayings, Kerry, has always been, until humanity changes, history will not. You know, and we've had all these wonderful ideas, and we've made great improvements throughout time. You know, I mean, the fact that, I mean, there have been improvements made, but at a fundamental level, we've had the same playbook. And that's why we're sort of defeated at the end, like, what the hell? I mean, you try and make one change, you know, shit, there we are again. But I think, Kerry, and I believe this before I wrote my book, that what we are in, these interesting times, I mean, I remember my friend Ursula, she lived through the goddamn Holocaust, all right? I mean, I love her, okay? She's in her almost 90 years old, and she lived through the Holocaust. She wasn't in Germany per se. They got out right at the end. Her mother finally prevailed on her father, who didn't want to leave. You know, we got to get the fuck out of this place. So they got out of Germany in right at the end, we could still get out. And they ended up in this little town in Belgium for a while. And Ursula said that it was a dinky little town, and she remembers going to school there. She was 4 or 5 years old. One of the kids came up and said, "Did you kill Jesus?" And Ursula looked at her, the kid goes, "I don't know. If I did, I don't remember." Right? But the town took care of them. And then the Nazis came in. You know, they got to Belgium. And then they couldn't go to school. And the day before the Nazis were going to put on the train, the town mayor came to them and said,
"Get out."
Get out. And they gave them a ham.
Really?
And they took that ham all with across to the Pyrenees and made it. Well, last year, I'm sitting with Ursula. She's getting up in age, and she goes, "You know, you're born, something interesting happens, And we're spiritualists.
You die. Yeah.
Yeah. You're born, something interesting happens, you die. And I looked at Ursula, who's one of my dear friends. I said, and then something else interesting happens. And she laughed. She laughed.
Yeah.
And I think, Kerry, that's sort of the way it is. The box is life, death, pain, learning, suffering. But in the box, we're so focused on the box itself. We have no understanding of what's beyond the box. And everybody who's talked about what's beyond the box, everything they've said has been crapped up by the people who interpreted what they said about the box beyond. That's human nature. So here we are in 2022. I think, Kerry, now we're a lot closer to the shitstorm than we were, when you and I started talking about this stuff.
Yeah, 11 years ago.
11 years ago.
I believe time flies when the world is collapsing,
Well, it is, because so much is going on. And that's why it's accelerating, because the rate of change is accelerating. And one thing human beings don't like is change. We try and hold on. I always said that if we had our druthers, we never would have gotten off the merry-go-round at 5 years old. We never would have. And so that's just baked in the cake. But we're being forced to, collectively and individually.
Yeah.
And I've been beating this drum. I remember when Marshall had that Positive Deviant Network, and Marshall hated. He's my friend from law school. He hated what I was saying, Kerry.
Sure.
I was beating the doom, and there was no sound. There was no signs of the forest wasn't on fire. But Darryl seems to have lost his.
Yeah. Well, you were
on a bad run.
You were sounding the clarion call for sure.
Yeah. And my last talk, I remember I go in there and I would talk to these people. They weren't expecting me to say what I said because nobody else was saying it. And I knew they sort of didn't want to hear it because nobody wants to hear this shit. Nobody wants to sit there in the third grade and have the little kid come in who just went to the bathroom and come back say the toilets are overflowing.
The sky is falling.
The sky is falling.
It's interesting as we get closer to what you've been talking about all these years. It's becoming more and more obvious that the current system's unsustainable. Darryl, you still have your website? Can we read your work there? Are you writing anything now?
Well, no, it's sort of frozen. In fact, GoDaddy screwed up our website again. So we're hiring people to try and get me back online. So you can't even find drschoon.com. All right. We're still paying GoDaddy our monthly VIG. We're having to hire somebody else to try and put it back up. So I'm not even available there. So, maybe my voice is no longer available. I imagine it'll be back there soon, but what the hell, Kerry? You and I are talking today.
That's it. All right. Well, hey, if you got a question for Darryl, you want an answer to, just shoot me an email. I'll make sure you get the answer.
Yeah, talk to Kerry. He and I are still talking.
KL@kerrylutz.com. And Darryl, it's always great talking to you. And hey, we'll talk again soon, hopefully before the ultimate collapse occurs. But I just find it fascinating that China is warning the West, don't raise interest rates too fast, too high. Well, they're cutting their rates for the first time in 2 years. And that to me is like the veritable 5-alarm fire in Manhattan. They call out all the every single fire department in the area to come deal with this fire because it's too much for anyone to handle.
Well, Kerry, this is what's fascinating, what's happening in China. The central banks have the same problem. It's credit. And then you get too much credit, you get a bubble and it collapses. What's fascinating to me, because we're now pricking our bubble, $1 trillion credit bubble. The biggest specific bubble in the world was the property market in China. All right. Chinese people bought their property up front, no credit. They paid cash. That's how wired they were into real estate. So the leverage happened not at the retail level. The leverage happened at the developer level where they took the cash of the buyers and borrowed more money to build the property at once. And this was the biggest bubble in the world. 2 years ago, the Communist Party in China decided we got to do something about it. And they started yanking the credit. What's happening in China with the collapse of the property bubble is the same thing that's going to be happening in the West with our collapse of our stock market bubble here. The central banks in governments around the world have no choice. It's being forced on them. And you're right. The Chinese is a warning, a 5-alarm fire. They're telling us not to pop it too slow because they know what we do is going to affect them. All right. Because we're all in the same boat. But the truth is, no one is in control at the top. Neither the Chinese, nor the Americans, nor the EU, nor the UK. We're all in a sinking boat.
As the man said, it's a big excrement sandwich, and we're all going to have to take a bite.
All right.
And we'll leave it at that. Darryl, thanks so much. We'll talk to you.
Thanks, Kerry.
And man, be well.
You too.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.